Tonight, all around the world, there are people remembering the most historic death the world had ever bore witness to. Wherever there is breath and life and humanity, whether at its best or even at its worst, there is a kind of remembering today. We remember this death. And while it was completely undeserved, it was absolutely necessary. This death, administered with torture and violence, was endured by grace and love. I invite you to light a candle in your worship space as we experience together the way of the cross. This particular death, while marked in pages of time, passed long before us, brought forth life that bears witness to us today, brings hope to us today, and brings light to us today. This remembering of Jesus. Jesus is arrested. We begin with the betrayal of Jesus with a kiss by his friend and disciple, Judas Iscariot. Judas betrayed Jesus for a mere 30 pieces of silver. From Matthew chapter 26, verses 14 through 16 and 48 through 50. Then one of the 12, who was called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, "What will you give me if I turn Jesus over to you?" They paid him 30 pieces of silver. From that time on, he was looking for an opportunity to turn him in. His betrayer had given them a sign: "Arrest the man I kiss." Just then he came to Jesus and he said, "Hello, Rabbi." Then he kissed him. But Jesus said to him, "Friend, do what you came to do." Then they came and grabbed Jesus and they arrested him. Jesus is condemned. From Matthew chapter 27, verses 20 and verses 22 through 24. But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to kill Jesus. Pilate said, "Then what should I do with Jesus, who is called Christ?" They all said, "Crucify him." But he said, "Why? What wrong has he done?" They shouted even louder, "Crucify him!" Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere and that a riot was starting. So he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It's your problem." Jesus' cross is laid on him. Matthew 27, verses 27 through 31. The governor's soldiers took Jesus into the governor's house, and they gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. They stripped him and put a red military coat on him. They twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They put a stick in his right hand. Then they bowed down in front of him and mocked him, saying, "Hey, King of the Jews," after they spit on him. They then took the stick and struck his head again and again. When they finished mocking him, they stripped him out of the military coat and put his own clothes back on him. And they led him away to crucify him. The cross means something very different to us today than it did during Roman times. The cross has become a Christian icon to us due to the traditions and church history surrounding it. So much of its real meaning is somewhat lost to us. Crucifixion and the different tortures it involved are incomprehensible to us. Punishment by crucifixion often started long before they would reach the cross. It was their custom to flog a criminal first, customarily 39 times, but the Romans would often do more. Jesus would have been hit with a whip made of braided leather thongs and metal balls that would cause deep bruising and a tearing of his flesh. For many, this type of punishment ended at the flogging. Some never made it to the cross, but Jesus did. Jesus falls the first time. From John chapter 19, verse 17. Carrying his cross by himself, he went out to a place called Skull Place, in Aramaic meaning Golgotha. From Luke chapter 22, verses 26 and 27. The greatest among you must become like a person of lower status, and the leader like a servant. So which one is greater, the one who is seated at the table or the one who serves at the table? Isn't it the one who is seated at the table? But I am among you as one who serves. Jesus meets his mother. From John chapter 19, verses 26 and 27. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, "Woman, here is your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And from that time on, this disciple took her into his home. Simon of Cyrene helps carry the cross. From Matthew chapter 27, verse 32. As they were going out, they found Simon, a man from Cyrene. They forced him to carry his cross. From Luke chapter 9, verse 23. Jesus said to everyone, "All who want to come after me must say no to themselves, take up their cross daily, and follow me." Veronica wipes Jesus' face. One of the earliest references to Veronica, the woman, come from apocryphal Acts of Pilate, such as the Gospel of Nicodemus. There's this passage in the work where various people appear at Jesus' trial before Pilate to testify about him. One of these witnesses was the woman, formerly with the issue of blood, who touched the hem of Jesus' garment. While in the earliest recensions of the work, the woman is not given a name. In some later versions, she is given the name VERONICA, or some variant thereof, one of which is Veronica. She is said to have offered a cloth. She is said to have offered a cloth to wipe his face, which left traces of blood, sweat, and dirt behind, leaving an imprint of Jesus' face upon the cloth. Also known as the Imago Dei, or image of God. From John chapter 13, verses 14 through 16. If I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you too must wash each other's feet. I have given you an example. Just as I have done, you also must do. I assure you, servants aren't greater than their master, nor are those who are sent greater than the one who sent them. Jesus falls a second time. From Luke 23, verse 35. The people were standing around watching, but the leaders sneered at him, saying, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he really is the Christ sent from God, the chosen one." From Mark chapter 10, verses 42 through 45. The ones who are considered the rulers by the Gentiles show off their authority over them, but that's not the way it will be with you. Whoever wants to be great among you will be your servant. Whoever wants to be first among you will be the slave of all. For the human one didn't come to be served, but rather to serve and to give his life to liberate many people. Jesus meets the women of Jerusalem. From Luke chapter 23, verses 27 through 29. A huge crowd of people followed Jesus, including women who were mourning and wailing for him. Jesus turned to the women and said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, don't cry for me. Rather, cry for yourselves and your children. The time will come when they will say, 'Happy are those who are unable to become pregnant, the wombs that never gave birth, and the breasts that never nursed a child.'" Jesus falls a third time. From John chapter 15, verses 12 through 13. This is my commandment. Love each other just as I have loved you. No one has greater love than to give up one's life for one's friends. And from Matthew chapter 5, verses 43 and 44, 46 and 48. You have heard that it was said, "You must love your neighbor and hate your enemy." But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who harass you, so that you will be acting as children of your Father who is in heaven. If you love only those who love you, what reward do you have? Don't even the tax collectors do the same? Therefore, just as your heavenly Father is complete in showing love to everyone, so also you must be complete. Jesus is stripped of his garment. John chapter 19, verses 23 and 24. When the soldiers crucified Jesus, they took his clothes and his sandals and divided them into 4 shares, one for each soldier. His shirt was seamless, woven as one piece from the top to the bottom. They said to each other, "Let's not tear it let's cast lots to see who will get it. Jesus is nailed to the cross. From Mark chapter 15, verses 25 through 30. It was 9 a.m. when they crucified him. The notice of the formal charge against him was written, "The King of the Jews." They crucified 2 outlaws with him, one on his right and one on his left. People walking by insulted him, shaking their heads and saying, "Ha, so you were going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, were you? Save yourself and come down from that cross." Jesus dies. From Luke chapter 23, verses 44 through 46. It was now about noon, and darkness covered the whole earth until about 3 o'clock while the sun stopped shining. Then the curtain in the sanctuary tore down the middle. Crying out in a loud voice, Jesus said, "Father, into your hands I entrust my life." After he said this, he breathed for the last time. Jesus is laid in the tomb. From John chapter 19, verses 40 through 42. Following Jewish burial customs, they took Jesus' body and wrapped it with the spices in linen cloths. There was a garden in the place where Jesus was crucified, and in the garden was a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid. Because it was the Jewish preparation day and the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus in it.